In September of 1906, on the edge of the village of Oraibi, two men faced each other across a line drawn in the sand. One was Tewa, leader of the faction the U.S. government called the Friendlies. The other was Ukiuma, leader of the faction called the Hostiles, an old man who believed his people's way of life was being erased by outside pressure. The two men agreed on a contest. Whoever could pull the other across the line would decide who stayed in Oraibi and who left for good. They pulled for hours. Neither man would yield. When it finally ended, Tewa had won, and Ukiuma walked away from the only home his people had known for centuries, taking his followers with him. 6 miles northwest, on a lower stretch of the same mesa, they founded a new village. They called it Hotevilla. Ukiuma carried something else out of Oraibi that day. He was the keeper of a set of stone tablets that Hopi tradition says were given to the Fire Clan by Maasaw, the deity associated with the underworld, death, and the earth itself. One of those tablets, according to that same tradition, was broken at some point in the distant past. A corner was taken away by someone the Hopi call Pahana, the lost white brother, who is said to be coming back one day to return it. That's the piece everyone remembers about this story. A missing corner, a promised return. What almost nobody asks is a simpler question. Who has actually seen this tablet, and what happened every time someone claimed they had? The Hopi trace their origin story to an emergence from a previous world through a place called Sipapu, located somewhere near the Grand Canyon and the confluence of the Colorado and Little Colorado rivers. After emerging into what they call the Fourth World, different clans migrated in all directions before eventually settling at Oraibi. A village archaeologists and the Hopi themselves date to roughly 1150 AD, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America. Tradition holds that before the clans scattered, Maasaw gave 4 sacred tablets to 2 clans. 3 went to the Bear clan, 1, broken at the corner, went to the Fire clan. The instructions were specific: keep the tablets, wait for signs. When those signs appeared, at the close of the Fourth World and the start of the Fifth, reveal the tablets and their message to the wider world. The first real test of this tradition on record happened in 1540, when a Spanish scouting party, led by Pedro de Tovar, reached the Hopi villages as part of the Coronado expedition. According to Hopi oral accounts recorded by later researchers, when the Spanish approached Oraibi, some of the Hopi initially wondered whether these strangers might be the returning Pahana. The Hopi drew a line of cornmeal across the ground, a boundary the Spanish were meant to respect if they came in peace. Spanish accounts describe a short confrontation before the Hopi surrendered the village. Whatever hope some of the Hopi had that the Spanish were their lost brother didn't survive the encounter. If you're finding this kind of investigation useful, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from tonight. That first failed test set a pattern that would repeat for centuries. Christian missionaries in the 19th and 20th centuries also tried to present themselves as the true Pahana. None of them, according to Hopi accounts, could produce the missing piece of the tablet, and none of them knew what's described as the proper greeting, or the ceremonial knowledge the true Pahana would supposedly carry. Each time, the tradition held that the visitor had failed the test. By the time of the Oraibi split in 1906, the tablets and the prophecy tied to them had become tangled up with a much more immediate conflict. The government was pushing Hopi children into boarding schools. Missionaries wanted converts. Ukiuma and the traditionalists at Hotevilla resisted all of it, and paid for that resistance directly. On December 2, 1911, after years of standoff, the U.S. Army sent troops to Hotevilla and forcibly removed children from the village to put them in government schools. To the traditionalists, this looked like exactly what the old warnings had described. Strange people would come and force the Hopi to live by rules that weren't their own. After Ukiuma's death, the role of keeper and the responsibility for interpreting the prophecy passed largely to his son, Dan Kachongva. In 1948, a group of traditional Hopi spiritual leaders met and made a decision that would shape how this story reached the outside world. 3 years after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which some Hopi elders interpreted as the fulfillment of a warning about a gourd of ashes, the leaders chose 4 men to serve as public interpreters of the prophecy. Kachongva was one, so were David Manongi, Dan Evehema, and a younger man named Thomas Banyacya. Banyacya would end up carrying this responsibility the longest and the furthest. Here's where the story usually gets simple, and where it shouldn't. In 1963, a writer named Frank Waters published a book called Book of the Hopi, built from conversations with roughly 30 Hopi elders and a Hopi translator named Oswald White Bear Fredericks. For a lot of people outside the Hopi world, this became the source. It's still the book most commonly cited when people talk about the Fire Clan tablet, the missing corner, and the prophecy of Pahana. Waters even claimed that in 1960, in Oraibi, he was personally shown one of the tablets. He described it as a gray stone roughly 10 inches long, 8 inches wide, an inch and a half thick, marked with rose-colored blotches. That detail matters, because it's one of the very few times anyone outside the Hopi community claims to have actually seen the object at the center of this whole story. But Book of the Hopi carries a serious problem that most retellings leave out entirely. Hopi people denounced it. Groups of Hopi elders requested meetings with Waters and his publisher on multiple occasions after it came out, upset about how their traditions had been presented. Armin Geertz, a scholar who has spent decades studying Hopi prophecy, has pointed out something telling. Specialists in the field routinely avoid even mentioning the book, despite it being by far the most commercially successful book ever written about the Hopi. That's not a small detail. That's a direct signal from the community the book claims to represent, telling researchers the book doesn't hold up. So the most cited source for this prophecy is also one that the people whose story it claims to tell have publicly rejected. That's not proof the underlying tradition is false. Traditions can be real, even when a particular popular retelling of them is flawed. But it does mean anyone treating Book of the Hopi as a clean transcript of Hopi belief is working from shakier ground than the packaging suggests. And there's a second problem, one that's even easier to check, and somehow almost never gets checked. One of the most widely circulated pieces of Hopi prophecy online is the story of a Hopi elder called White Feather, who supposedly told a minister named David Young 9 signs marking the end of the Fourth World in the summer of 1958. This account gets attributed to Frank Waters and Book of the Hopi constantly. You'll find it quoted that way across dozens of websites. Here's the problem: it isn't in the book. Researchers who've actually gone through Book of the Hopi, page by page, have confirmed there's no white feather passage in it. What actually happened, as best as it can be traced, is that the white feather account first circulated in 1959 as a mimeographed manuscript passed around Methodist and Presbyterian churches, a full 4 years before Waters published anything. Somewhere along the way, as the story spread through decades of retelling, it picked up a false citation. People assumed it must have come from the one famous book on the subject, so that's the source they gave it. Nobody checked. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it tells you something about how prophecy stories survive and spread that has nothing to do with whether the underlying tradition is genuine. A claim doesn't need to be true to become durable. It just needs a plausible-sounding source attached to it, repeated often enough that checking the source starts to feel unnecessary. That reframes the earlier question. It's not just, did anyone actually see the tablet? It's how much of what people confidently cite about this prophecy was ever actually verified by anyone, at any point, rather than simply passed along. Which makes what happened next even more interesting, because Thomas Banyacya's part of this story is not secondhand. It's extensively documented, in his own words, with dates, named officials, and a paper trail. The 1948 gathering had given Banyacya a mission: get the Hopi message in front of the United Nations, an institution the elders had reportedly foreseen decades earlier in prophecy as a great house of mica, a meeting place where nations would gather to solve problems without war. The elders told him he would need to knock on that door 4 times. He tried and failed 3 times over more than 4 decades. In October of 1991, he delivered a letter and a sacred prayer feather to John Washburn, then a director in the Secretary General's office at the UN. That contact finally opened the door. On December 10, 1992, Banyacya stood at the podium of the UN General Assembly, sprinkled cornmeal beside it as a spiritual gesture, and delivered a short address, the room only partially filled with delegates. He spoke about floods, hurricanes, and climate shifts he said matched warnings the Hopi elders had held for generations, and he held up an image of a petroglyph the Hopi call Prophecy Rock, showing 2 paths, one following natural law and one leading toward destruction through technology divorced from it. The night before his speech, there was a total lunar eclipse over New York City. If you enjoy digging into stories like this one, subscribing helps more than you'd think. Now here's where the second half of this changes what the first half set up. Peter Whiteley, an anthropologist who's done fieldwork with the Hopi since 1980 and written some of the most detailed scholarship on Oraibi's history, has argued something that complicates the popular version of the 1906 split even further. The standard story treats the Oraibi split as a straightforward religious and cultural conflict, traditionalists defending the old ways against progressives open to outside influence. Whiteley, drawing on Hopi oral testimony alongside government archives, argues the split was actually the outcome of a deliberate, coordinated maneuver among Hopi political and religious leaders on both sides, essentially an internal power struggle, dressed in the language of prophecy and purity. Hopi society, in his account, wasn't as flat or consensus-driven as outsiders assumed. It had its own ruling elite, and that elite had its own reasons for engineering a break. That doesn't erase the prophecy. It complicates who was using it, and why, at the exact moment it mattered most, for who would go on to hold the tablets. Because remember what actually determined who became keeper of the Fire Clan tablet after 1906. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a ceremony designed around continuity. It was a tug of war over a line in the sand, the outcome of a specific, physical, winnable contest between 2 men. The prophecy explains what the tablets mean. It says nothing about how ownership of them got settled that particular September, and the government records, the census data, the internal Hopi political maneuvering Whiteley traces, all point toward something more contested and more human than the tidy spiritual narrative usually allows. So where does that leave the tablet itself, the physical object this entire story keeps circling back to? As far as anyone outside the Hopi community can establish, the tablet has never been examined by an outside institution. It has never been carbon dated, never been independently photographed and published with scholarly documentation, never been submitted to any process that could confirm its age, its material, or even its precise physical description, beyond Frank Waters' single second-hand account from a visit in 1960, an account that comes from a source the Hopi themselves have publicly disputed on other grounds. The tablet exists, as far as the historical record goes, entirely inside a chain of trust that the Hopi control completely, and that they have never opened to outside verification. That's not evidence the tablet doesn't exist, or that the tradition around it is invented. Sacred objects tied to living religious practice are routinely kept outside the reach of academic or scientific examination, and that choice deserves respect rather than suspicion. But it does mean the tablet occupies a strange position in this story. It's the physical anchor for everything else, the missing corner, the identity of the true Pahana, the whole test that every claimed candidate has failed for 400 years. And it's also the one piece of evidence that has never been available for anyone outside Hopi tradition to check. which means the prophecy was built, whether by design or by circumstance, so that only the people who already hold the tablet can ever confirm whether someone has produced the missing piece. There's no external referee. There's no version of this that gets settled by an archaeologist or a museum curator. It gets settled, if it ever does, entirely on Hopi terms, inside Hopi hands, exactly the way it's been held, since a corner was supposedly broken off long before anyone alive today was born. Dan Kachongva died in 1972, having told those close to him that his father, Ukiuma, believed he would live to see the start of what the Hopi call the Day of Purification. He didn't. Thomas Banyacya died in 1999, 21 years after fulfilling the mission the elders had given him in 1948, still waiting, along with everyone who had trusted him to carry that message, for the return he had spent his whole adult life preparing the world to recognize. The village of Hotevilla still stands, where Ukiuma and his followers walked to in 1906, still home to Fire Clan tradition, still, according to the people who live there, in possession of the tablet that started all of this. The corner that was broken off has never been produced by anyone the Hopi have accepted as genuine. Not the Spanish in 1540, not the missionaries who came after them, not anyone in the more than 60 years since Banyacya began carrying that message outward, looking for the moment his elders told him to expect. The question this story actually leaves you with isn't whether Pahana is coming. It's this: if the only people who can ever verify his return are the same people who have held the tablet, in secret, for over a century, what would that verification even look like to the rest of us? And would we recognize it if it happened?